Well, hello everybody. This is Mike Prevost from MikePrevost.com, and I want to talk to you about something that I struggled with for most of my life and really only came to terms with much later in life. And once I did, I found it much easier to get rid of my excess stuff. And that thing I want to talk to you about is called the sunk cost fallacy. And what I want to explain to you is real simply why selling something that you don't need for a loss is not a loss but actually a gain. So let's get started. So let's discuss this by using a real simple example. So it's January 1st, and after the holidays, you realize you packed on a couple of pounds like most years, but this year you got motivated and you decided to buy a treadmill because it would be really convenient exercising at home. And so you park the treadmill in your bedroom, and your plan is to get on the treadmill every morning and exercise. Well, you discovered to your dismay that you really don't like running on the treadmill. I can tell you, I hate running on the treadmill. And 3 years later, this is what your treadmill looks like, the ubiquitous treadmill that's hanging clothes. And you realize that the treadmill is just not the thing for you. You're not going to use a treadmill. You've used it maybe 3 times. And so you ask yourself the question, what do I do with this treadmill that's taking up so much space in my bedroom? So you contemplate, do I sell it? Well, you paid $1,000 for the treadmill because you bought, the best treadmill you could find, and you start looking on eBay and Craigslist, and to your dismay, you discover that you're really only going to be able to get about $350 for that treadmill. And so, the result is if you sell it, you're going to take a loss of $650. And so you decide, hey, there's no way I'm not selling this treadmill because I don't want to take a loss of $650. But is this the right way to think about it? Well, sometimes it's easier and more objective to think in terms of a business than to think about personal purchasing. And so we're going to use an example of a business to see how a business would think about these kinds of purchases and selling decisions. So here's our example. We're going to say that we're a business and that each one of these little bundles of cash represents $1 million. And we start off with the situation on the left. Business is going pretty well, and we've accumulated $6 million in cash reserves. And we're a business that produces widgets in factories. And we decide, hey, we got some cash reserves. We can actually increase our profits if we add more manufacturing capacity. So we decide to buy a factory. And the factory costs $3 million. And so we shift over to the right, we make our purchase. We spend $3 million, and in return we get a factory. So we started off in the situation on the left with $6 million, and we traded $3 million for a factory. And so now we have $3 million in cash and a factory. Well, lo and behold, 3 years later, our factory ends up being like that treadmill that we hang clothes on in the bedroom. We discovered that we really didn't need that excess capacity. Our business projections were incorrect, and we bought a factory, and we discovered, we don't need that excess capacity. We spent that $3 million on a factory that we're not using. And so we asked the question, just like the treadmill, do we sell it? And we can go through the same calculations again for the factory. We paid $3 million for the factory, and as we took a look at the factory and factored in all the costs and what we could sell it for, we figured we're going to be able to get maybe $1 million for that factory. And so we take a look at it, and we see that if we sell that factory, we're going to take a $2 million loss. So as a business, we take a look at this, we ask the same question as the person with the unnecessary treadmill: do I sell it and take that $2 million loss? Our first inclination is to say, well, no way, I don't want to sell it and take a $2 million loss. But let's look at it a little more carefully. So the first thing we have to consider is that this factory that we're not using actually has costs associated with it. So we're paying insurance, we're paying taxes, we're paying maintenance, we're paying utilities, maybe repair. There's also opportunity cost. And what I mean by that, by opportunity cost, is that if we sell the factory and get some money for that factory, there's an opportunity to make money with that money, with the proceeds of the sale. So all of these are a cost. Now, if we think back to our treadmill example, are there costs associated with holding onto that treadmill? Well, maybe not insurance and taxes, but it's a thing that's maybe taking up space in our bedroom, or maybe it's taking up one garage bay in our garage and keeping us from parking the car in there. And maybe one extra item isn't that big a deal, but by the time you start accumulating a lot of extra items, maybe now you need a 3-bedroom instead of a 2-bedroom because you have to store extra stuff, or you need a 3-car garage because 2 bays are taken up with storing your stuff, that kind of thing. So there are costs associated with hanging on to excess stuff. So let's take a look very clearly at the choices that this business has and think about them objectively. So they really have 2 choices or 2 options. Choice A is don't sell, because I don't want to take that $2 million loss on that factory. But take a look at what option A represents. We still have our $3 million that we had in the bank, but we have a factory that's not really useful to us at all, and we also have the costs associated with maintaining that factory. Okay? Well, let's look at choice B. We decide to sell. We have our $3 million, plus now we get an extra $1 million, plus we have an opportunity to make money on that extra $1 million. Really, this is a value comparison. The $3 million is the same in both cases. So just like a math equation, they cancel out. And now we're comparing the value of a useless factory plus the cost it incurs to that $1 million plus the opportunity it provides. And I think it's pretty clear, that choice B is the winner in this case. If we make an objective choice for a business, that choice B is the best option for the business. It puts them in the best overall position. So now I want to ask some important questions. So in terms of the factory and buying a factory and then selling it for a loss, what was the cost? What was the cost to the company? Was it what I paid or what I lost by selling it? And I want to ask a second question. When was the cost incurred? Was the cost incurred when I bought the factory or when I sell the factory? Well, the answer to the first question is what was the cost? The cost is clearly what I paid for the factory. As soon as I spent that money was gone. That's what's called sunk cost. When I buy an object, that money comes out of my account, and I'm not going to get a partial refund from the seller if I don't use it or I don't find value in it. When I buy it, that money's gone. It's sunk cost. And when was the cost incurred? Well, it's not when I sell the factory, right? That cost was incurred when I bought the factory. So this needs to be thought of as a cost that's incurred in the past. It's already done. It's a sunk cost, and that money is gone. And the sunk cost really is irrelevant to the future decision. Because it's a sunk cost, really, as we said earlier, we're really just comparing the value of 2 options. And the sunk cost has nothing to do with it. We're comparing the value of an item that's no longer of use to us, plus any cost that it might incur, to an amount of money we can get by selling that item, plus any opportunity that money might provide to us. And neither of those things has to do with the cost of the item, because the cost is really a sunk cost. So it's obvious in the case of the treadmill and the factory that we made a mistake. We bought something and we ended up not really needing that thing, and then we sold it for a loss. And so overall it was a loss of money. But I want to ask another very important question. When was the mistake made? Was the mistake made when they bought the item that was not really necessary, or when they sold it? And I think if you think carefully in both circumstances, you'll agree that in these examples, the mistake was clearly made when they bought the item. They bought something that wasn't really necessary. Well, so let's think this through a little bit and come to some final conclusions to wrap this up. When you buy something, you incur a cost. It's a sunk cost. The money's gone and it's spent. You're not going to get a partial refund if you don't find it useful. Okay, so items that are no longer useful to you, like say stored items, they may incur continued cost. You gotta clean it, you gotta maintain it, you gotta insure it, you gotta store it, you gotta upgrade it, etc., etc. When you sell something for less than you paid, you're not incurring a loss at that time. The loss occurred when you bought the item. It's a sunk cost, so that money's already gone. When you sell something that you don't need, there's a gain, not a loss, because the loss or cost has already occurred when you bought it, whether you sell it or not. So it's actually a gain. The real question is this: does the money I receive from selling it have more value to me than the item which is not being used? And that's really the way to think about it, and that's how a business would think about it. Well, there's a final thought that this brings up, and that's facing emotional consequences. And it's one reason why this is so difficult, and why we sometimes refuse to make a decision on an item that we're no longer using. And I felt prey to this for a long, long time. Selling something for a loss forces me to confront the fact that buying it may have been a mistake. That maybe I was too quick to buy for some reason, and that it was the purchase that was a mistake, not the sale. It forces me to examine my purchasing behaviors. Maybe I'm too quick to pull the trigger on buying items, especially items I don't need. And in the end, it forces us to confront the issue that it's just less emotionally painful to stay in denial, and rationalized incorrectly that holding on to an item prevents a loss. And this is exactly what is the sunk cost fallacy. And I think we've shown here in the last couple of minutes that that's a false way to look at it, and not an objective way to look at it. Well, there you go. That's the sunk cost fallacy, a real simple concept, but it took me a long time to really grapple with it and really internalize that concept. And once I finally did, I had a much easier time getting rid of excess stuff, because I thought of it as more of a value decision or a business decision. Anyway, if you found this little concept useful, this lecture useful, please pass it along. And if you want to discuss it a little bit more, head on over to MikePrevos.com and click the Contact Me button. Thanks for listening.